The mountain plateau thundered with the weight of 300 failures. 30-year-old Alpha Garrick Stohart stood at the edge of the ceremonial circle, his massive frame carved from the same granite as the peaks surrounding them. His war-scarred hands clenched and unclenched as bitter mountain winds whipped his dark hair across a face that had forgotten how to show anything but duty. Before him, the ancestral stone, a boulder the size of a war wagon, sat unmoved, its surface etched with runes that seemed to drink the moonlight rather than reflect it. 17 Alpha warriors knelt in the frost-hardened grass, their heads bowed in shame. Each represented the finest bloodlines in the Stoneheart Pack, descendants of legendary warriors whose names were carved into the very cliffs of their territory. Yet when they had placed their hands upon the stone, nothing. Not even a tremor. Not even a whisper of recognition from the ancient magic that supposedly flowed only for those of purest blood. My brothers and sisters, Garrick's voice cut through the mountain silence like an avalanche finding its path, commanding immediate attention from the assembled crowd of nearly 500 pack members. For 3 centuries, this stone has been the measure of our worth, the proof of our strength, the justification for every law, every hierarchy, every exile we have enacted in the name of preserving the purity of our line. Murmurs rippled through the gathering like wolves moving through underbrush. Along the outer edges of the circle, the lower caste members, the laborers, the camp workers, the disgraced bloodlines stood in their worn leathers and patched wool, forbidden from stepping onto the sacred ground but required to bear witness. The ceremony was meant for the highborn alone, a ritual that would determine not just the pack's worthiness, but their very survival as the old treaties crumbled and rival packs circled like vultures. Elder Silas, high priest of the council, straightened beside the stone with predatory satisfaction. His silver hair was bound with ceremonial gold, and his pale eyes held the calculating gleam of someone who had spent 40 years ensuring that power remained exactly where tradition dictated it should be. He had orchestrated this moment for months, the public demonstration that the Stoneheart Pack still possessed the pure blood necessary to command respect from their enemies. The challenge, Garrick continued, his gaze moving past the kneeling warriors to study the faces of the council members, was simple. Place your hand upon the stone. Let the magic of our ancestors recognize your bloodline. Prove that we are still worthy of the gifts the lunar goddess bestowed upon our founders. Several council members exchanged uncomfortable glances. Beta Marcus whispered something to his companion, earning a sharp look from Silas. The triumphant certainty that had filled the plateau an hour ago now faltered as the implications became clear. If none of their champions could move the stone, what did that say about the foundations upon which their entire society was built? In the shadows beyond the torchlight, at the very edge where dirt met frost-covered grass, Alara Nightbloom pressed her work-roughened fingers against her branded shoulder, her heart hammering against her ribs as she watched. At 21, she possessed a haunting beauty that seemed almost out of place among the camp laborers, golden-brown hair that fell in tangled waves past her shoulders, and eyes the color of storm clouds that held depths far beyond her years. The simple gray tunic she wore was stained with the day's labor, marked clearly with the red brand of disgraced blood that made her invisible to the nobles who never bothered to notice those who hauled their water and mended their weapons. Yet Alara could not tear herself away from the ceremony. Something about the stone called to her, had always called to her since she was a child, a vibration in her bones that intensified whenever she passed the monument during her work shifts. She had spent her entire life in this pack, ever since they had dragged her mother to trial as a traitor and burned her family name from the ancestral records. In all that time, she had watched from the margins, learning the complex dynamics of pack politics while remaining carefully beneath notice. Elder Silas. Garrick's voice drew Alara's attention back to the circle. As the keeper of our bloodline records, would you care to explain to the pack how 17 alpha warriors of pure lineage have failed to elicit even a spark from the ancestral stone? Silas rose with practiced dignity, his ceremonial robes rustling as he approached the stone with his gnarled staff. The assembled crowd leaned forward, clearly expecting him to provide some scholarly explanation that would preserve the comfortable order of their world. "My Lord Alpha," he said, his voice carrying the cultured authority of decades in power. "Surely such ancient magic is unpredictable. The stone may simply be testing us, waiting for a more auspicious moon phase. The bloodlines of these warriors are documented and verified through 3 centuries of careful records." An uncomfortable silence fell over the plateau. Garrick's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, though his expression remained neutral. "You're suggesting we postpone? Delay while our enemies sharpen their blades?" "I'm suggesting, my lord, that we defer to the wisdom of our traditions," Silas replied smoothly, gesturing to the kneeling warriors with a dismissive wave. "After all, the alternative, that our records are somehow flawed, would undermine the very foundation of pack law. Better to wait than to question 300 years of carefully preserved hierarchy." One by one, the council members nodded their agreement. Beta Marcus claimed the stone's silence was simply a call for more prayer and fasting. Elder Cassandra worried that attempting the ritual again too soon might anger the old magic. Lord Brennan simply cleared his throat and declared it unwise to read too much into a single ceremony, however significant. With each dismissal, the tension on the plateau grew thicker, colder than the mountain wind. Garrick's closest advisor, the scarred warrior Finn, shifted nervously behind him, clearly recognizing the disaster unfolding. If the stone never responded, if their champions were revealed as somehow unworthy, the carefully negotiated peace with neighboring packs would collapse within weeks. They would be seen as weak, fraudulent, ripe for conquest. Elara felt her chest tighten with an emotion she couldn't quite name, a burning rage mixed with something older, deeper, like a voice in her blood that had been whispering her entire life. These men had every advantage she had ever been denied: education, respect, the certainty that their ancestors were heroes rather than traitors. Yet they were walking away from the stone's challenge out of fear, clinging to their false records rather than face the truth. They spoke of pure blood and worthy lineages while the stone itself, the actual voice of their ancestors, had rejected them all. Her younger brother Cale stood somewhere in the crowd of laborers, awaiting his fate. Tomorrow, the council would exile him to the wastelands for the crime of defending himself against a highborn bully. Another disgraced bloodline cast out to preserve the illusion of purity. Another life sacrificed to maintain Elder Silas's carefully falsified records. The stone pulsed. Elara's head snapped up, her storm-gray eyes widening. No one else seemed to notice. The blue glow had been so faint, just a flicker of light racing across the carved runes like lightning trapped in ice. But she had felt it in her chest, in her bones, in the branded scar on her shoulder that suddenly burned as though freshly made. The stone was calling to her. "This is a disgrace." Elder Silas's voice rose above the murmuring crowd, reclaiming control of the narrative. "We should return to the keep, consult the ancient texts, and I will lift it." The words came out as barely more than a whisper, but in the sudden stillness of the mountain plateau, they carried like thunder. Every head turned. 500 pairs of eyes found the small figure at the edge of the circle, the camp laborer with dirt beneath her fingernails and a brand of shame on her shoulder, stepping forward into the torchlight. "I will lift the ancestral stone," Elara repeated, louder now, her voice steady despite the trembling in her legs. "And I will prove that your records are lies." For the first time in a century, the mountain itself seemed to hold its breath. Thank you for sticking around with me, my wonderful story family. If you're already hooked in for today's story and ready to enjoy it, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow, I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one. And you don't want to miss it. Now let us begin. Chapter 1. The laughter started as a low rumble, like distant thunder building into a storm. "The night bloom thinks she can lift the stone?" Beta Marcus's voice carried across the plateau, dripping with contempt. "Someone fetch a healer." The girls clearly suffered a blow to the head during her labors. The highborn warriors who had failed moments before now found their voices, their shame transforming into savage mockery. They jeered and whistled as Alara stepped onto the sacred ground, her worn boots leaving prints in the frost where noble's leather had trod. Elder Cassandra clutched her ceremonial robes as though the girl's very presence contaminated the circle. Lord Brennan turned his back entirely, unwilling to even watch such blasphemy. "This is an outrage," Elder Silas hissed, his staff striking the ground with sharp cracks. "Alpha Garrick, you cannot permit this. The girl bears the brand of traitor blood. She has no right to even approach the ancestral stone, much less touch it." But Garrick raised one massive hand, silencing the priest. His steel-gray eyes fixed on Alara with an intensity that made her feel stripped bare, as though he could see past the dirt and brands to something deeper. "Let her try," he said quietly, though his voice carried the weight of absolute command. "If the stone rejects her, we lose nothing. And if 17 Alpha warriors have failed, what harm can one Omega do?" The word stung, even though Alara knew he meant them as protection, a way to frame her attempt as inconsequential rather than heretical. She forced herself to keep walking, each step feeling like moving through deep water as hundreds of eyes bore into her back. The crowd's jeering intensified. Someone threw a pebble that struck her shoulder. Another voice called out suggestions for other impossible tasks she might attempt, moving mountains, capturing moonlight, teaching wolves to fly. Then she stood before it, and the mockery faded to white noise. The ancestral stone rose before her like a fragment of the mountain itself given form and purpose. Easily 12 feet tall and twice as wide, its surface was the color of midnight shot through with veins of silver that caught the torchlight and twisted it into something otherworldly. The stone's edges were jagged and cruel, as though it had been torn from the earth in violence rather than quarried with care. Ancient runes covered every visible surface, spiraling patterns that hurt to look at directly, symbols in a language that predated the pack itself, warnings and promises carved by hands that had turned to dust centuries ago. Alara had cleaned around this stone 100 times, had scrubbed bird droppings from its base and cleared snow from its shadow every winter. But she had never truly looked at it, never allowed herself to see it as anything more than one more monument to a power structure designed to keep her in chains. Now, standing in its presence with the weight of 500 gazes pressing down upon her, she understood why her ancestors had feared it. The stone radiated cold, not the simple chill of winter air, but something older and more absolute, as though it existed partially in a realm where warmth had never been conceived. The runes seemed to shift when she wasn't looking directly at them, writing and rewriting themselves in patterns that whispered at the edges of her consciousness. The metallic scent of ancient magic hung in the air, copper and ozone and something else, something that reminded her of her mother's voice in half-remembered lullabies. The brand on her shoulder burned like a living coal. Alara lifted her right hand, calloused palm facing the stone's surface. Behind her, someone laughed, high and mocking, already savoring her failure. Elder Silas began muttering a prayer, probably asking the goddess to strike down this presumptuous child before she could defile their most sacred relic. The stone pulsed again, that same flicker of blue lightning racing across the runes, and this time Alara knew she wasn't imagining it. She placed her hand against the cold, ancient surface and the world exploded into light. Chapter 2. The lightning came from within the stone itself, erupting through the ancient runes like water breaking through a dam that had held for centuries. Blue-white arcs of celestial fire raced up Alara's arm, wrapping around her shoulder, her neck, her entire body in chains of crackling light that should have burned her to ash, but instead felt like coming home. The brand on her shoulder blazed silver beneath her tunic, answering the stone's call with a language older than words. Alara gasped as power flooded through her veins, not the brutal strength of muscle and bone, but something vast and terrible and achingly beautiful. It sang in her blood like a chorus of forgotten voices, each one whispering a name she had never been allowed to claim. The stone trembled beneath her palm, and she realized with a shock that sent her heart racing that it wasn't resisting her touch. It was recognizing her. Impossible, Elder Silas breathed, his face draining of color as the runes blazed brighter, casting shadows that danced like living things across the frozen ground. The mockery died in every throat. 500 pack members stood frozen, watching as the girl they had dismissed as worthless lifted her other hand and placed it against the stone's surface. The lightning doubled, tripled, until the entire boulder was encased in a corona of blue celestial fire that turned night into day. The ancient symbols rewrote themselves before their eyes, spiraling outward from where Alara's hands made contact, forming patterns that some of the eldest members recognized from legends they had thought were merely stories. The mark of the lunar goddess. The seal of the first bloodline. Garrick took an involuntary step forward, his warrior's instincts screaming warnings his mind couldn't process. This wasn't possible. The girl was an Omega, branded as disgraced blood, relegated to camp labor because the records said her family were traitors who had tried to poison an Alpha 3 generations back. Yet the stone, the ancestral stone that had rejected 17 proven warriors, was responding to her touch with more power than he had ever seen, more than the legends described, more than should exist in the mortal world. Alara's storm-gray eyes had changed, lit from within by that same blue fire, and when she looked at the massive boulder, Garrick saw something in her expression that made his breath catch. Not strain. Not effort. Recognition. As though she and the stone were having a conversation in a language the rest of them had forgotten how to speak. Stop her. Silas shrieked, his composure shattering like ice. She's using dark magic. Witchcraft. This is an abomination against. The stone moved. Not a tremor. Not a shift. The 12-foot boulder that had stood unmoved for 3 centuries rose from the ground as Alara lifted, pulled upward by her single hand as though it weighed no more than a child's toy. The lightning intensified, arcing from the stone into the night sky in branches of blue fire that split the darkness and cast everything in sharp, unforgiving clarity. Gasps and screams erupted from the crowd. Several pack members fell to their knees, whether in terror or reverence, Garrick couldn't tell. Beta Marcus stumbled backward, his face slack with shock. The highborn warriors who had mocked Alara moments before now pressed against each other like frightened children, their carefully constructed superiority crumbling as they watched a branded Omega accomplish what they could not. The stone rose higher. 5 feet. 10 feet. Alara stood beneath it with her arm extended, her simple gray tunic whipping in winds that came from nowhere and everywhere, her hair streaming behind her like a banner of war. The blue lightning painted her in shades of divinity, and Garrick felt something ancient and primal stir in his chest, the recognition that his wolf gave to power, to strength, to an alpha. No, not an alpha. Something greater. The Omega laborer with dirt beneath her fingernails was the strongest being in the clearing, and every wolf present could feel it in their bones. The hierarchy they had built their entire society upon was a lie, and the truth blazed in celestial fire above their heads, held aloft by a girl they had spent years teaching to be invisible. Alara's voice rang out across the plateau, amplified by the magic coursing through her, and when she spoke, Garrick heard the echo of something divine behind the words. "Elder Silas," she said, her eyes still blazing with that impossible blue light. Tell them who my ancestors really were." The high priest's face twisted with rage and fear, his carefully maintained power slipping through his fingers like water. And then Alara closed her hand into a fist, and the stone, impossibly, terrifyingly, obeyed. Chapter 3. The stone settled back to earth with a sound like distant thunder, the impact sending tremors through the frozen ground that knocked several onlookers off their feet. The blue lightning flickered once, twice, then retreated into the runes as though it had never existed, leaving only the echo of impossible power hanging in the mountain air. Alara swayed, her arm dropping to her side as exhaustion crashed through her like a physical blow. The divine fire in her eyes guttered and died, returning them to their ordinary storm gray, and suddenly she was just a 21-year-old girl who had somehow channeled enough magic to rewrite everything her pack believed about bloodlines and destiny. The silence lasted exactly 3 heartbeats. "Seize her." Elder Silas's voice cracked across the plateau like a whip, all pretense of scholarly dignity abandoned. His face had gone purple with rage, spittle flying from his lips as he thrust his gnarled staff toward Alara. "Guards, arrest this witch before she corrupts the entire pack with her dark arts." 6 warriors in council colors surged forward, their hands reaching for the iron manacles they carried for transporting prisoners. Their faces held the blank determination of men following orders without question, without thought, because thinking about what they had just witnessed would mean confronting truths too dangerous to acknowledge. But they never reached her. Garrick moved with the fluid speed that had made him alpha, his massive frame suddenly between Alara and the guards. He didn't draw a weapon, he didn't need to. The sheer presence of him, the weight of authority and barely leashed violence, froze the warriors mid-stride as effectively as if he'd struck them down. "Stand. Down." Each word dropped like a stone into still water, and the guards stumbled backward, their training warring with their orders. "Alpha Garrick," Silas sputtered, his knuckles white around his staff. "You cannot protect her. The law is clear. Any use of unauthorized magic is punishable by unauthorized." Garrick's voice cut through the priest's words like a blade. The ancestral stone responded to her touch. "The stone that your records claim only responds to pure alpha blood. Either the girl is exactly what the stone says she is, or every law you've written for the past 3 centuries is built on lies." He let the implication hang in the air, his steel-gray eyes boring into Silas with an intensity that made the old man flinch. "Which is it, Elder?" The crowd erupted into chaos. Voices overlapped, some calling for Alara's arrest, others demanding answers about the stone's reaction, still others insisting this was all some elaborate trick. Beta Marcus tried to restore order while Lord Brennan argued furiously with Elder Cassandra. The careful hierarchy of the Stoneheart Pack was fracturing in real time, and Garrick could feel the tremors of it threatening to tear everything apart. He turned to look at Alara, and his breath caught. The girl stood trembling, her face pale and drawn, one hand pressed against her neck as though trying to hide something. But in the torchlight, Garrick could see the faint blue glow bleeding between her fingers, the same celestial fire that had erupted from the stone, pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat. "Let me see," he said quietly, and though it wasn't a command, Alara's hand dropped away as if compelled. The mark blazed on the left side of her neck, just below her jaw. It was intricate and impossible, a spiraling pattern of runes that seemed to shift and breathe with a life of their own. Garrick had seen those exact symbols before, carved into the ancestral stone itself, etched into the foundations of the oldest buildings in their territory. Painted in faded pigments on the walls of the sacred caves where alphas went to commune with their ancestors. The seal of the night bloom. The crest of the first Luna. Goddess above, Finn breathed behind him, and Garrick realized his advisor had moved close enough to see. "That's Alpha. That mark is from the founding bloodline. The one that Elder Silas declared extinct," Garrick finished, his voice hard as stone. He looked back at the high priest, who had gone ashen beneath his ceremonial gold. "The family you said died out in disgrace. The traitors you claimed tried to poison my grandfather." Silas's mouth worked soundlessly, his eyes darting between Garrick and Alara like a cornered animal seeking escape. "She's not disgraced blood," Garrick said, loud enough for the entire plateau to hear. "She's the rightful heir to the oldest bloodline in our pack. And you branded her a traitor to hide the truth." The guards who had been advancing on Alara now stood frozen, uncertain whether their target was a criminal or their future Luna. Alara touched the mark on her neck, her fingers trembling. "My mother told me stories," she whispered. "Before they burned her. She said our name meant something once. That we were protectors, not traitors. Your mother was right." Garrick extended his hand toward her, a gesture that sent shocked murmurs rippling through the crowd. And Elder Silas is going to tell us exactly why he tried to erase your family from history. Chapter 4. The Alphas keep rose from the mountainside like a clenched fist of stone and iron, its towers piercing the night sky where stars struggled against the smoke of 100 hearth fires. Alara had walked past these walls every day for 6 years, hauling water and firewood through the servants' entrance, keeping her eyes down and her presence small. She had never imagined she would enter through the main gates, flanked by Garrick's personal guard, while whispers followed her like ghosts. The great hall swallowed her in warmth and firelight. Tapestries depicting ancient battles hung from walls thick enough to withstand siege engines, and the ceiling arched high overhead, supported by pillars carved with the names of every alpha who had ruled the Stone Heart Pack. Alara's eyes traced those names involuntarily, searching for her family's mark and finding only smooth stone where the Nightbloom crest should have been. Chiseled away. Erased. Sit, Garrick said, gesturing to a chair near the massive hearth. Not the low stool where servants perched, but a high-backed seat upholstered in wolf pelts that still smelled of wild places. You're a guest in my home, Alara Nightbloom. Not a prisoner. She sat because her legs threatened to give out, exhaustion and shock finally catching up with her now that the adrenaline had burned away. Her hands still tingled where the lightning had coursed through them, and the mark on her neck pulsed with a warmth that felt alive, aware, waiting. Finn stood guard at the door while Garrick dismissed the other warriors, waiting until their footsteps faded before he pulled a heavy leather tome from a locked cabinet. The book was ancient, its cover cracked and water-stained, held together with iron clasps that looked older than the keep itself. The True Histories, Garrick said, placing it on the table between them with a thud that raised dust. The records that predate Elder Silas's carefully edited versions. My father showed them to me the night before he died, made me swear to keep them hidden until the time was right. His jaw clenched. I thought I had more time. I thought I could navigate the council's politics, slowly reform the system from within. I was a fool. Alara's throat tightened. What do they say about my family? Garrick opened the tome to a page marked with a strip of faded red cloth. The ink was brown with age, the script elegant and flowing, written by hands that had cared about truth rather than convenience. At the top of the page, rendered in gold leaf that still caught the firelight, was the Nightbloom crest, a crescent moon cradling a blooming flower, surrounded by stars. Your father was Aldrich Nightbloom, Garrick said quietly. Not a traitor. Not a poisoner. He was the son of the previous High Priestess, descended directly from the first Luna who helped found this pack 300 years ago. The Nightblooms weren't just another alpha family. They were the keepers of the old magic, the bridge between wolves and the lunar goddess herself. Alara stared at the page, at her father's name written in careful script alongside her mother's, Lyra of the Silverbrook clan, noted as a healer of exceptional skill. Beneath their names, her own, Alara, born under the blue moon, marked by the goddess. Then why, her voice cracked. Why did they call him a traitor? Why did they burn my mother and brand me with shame? Garrick's expression darkened, and for a moment Alara saw the rage he kept leashed beneath his alpha's calm. Because your father discovered what Elder Silas had done. The High Priest had been falsifying bloodline records for decades, elevating families who paid him tribute while suppressing those who questioned his authority. The pure bloodlines the Council claims to protect? Half of them are fabrications. Convenient lies that kept power in the hands of Silas's allies. He turned another page, revealing a letter written in Hasher script, the words angry and urgent. Your father confronted him, demanded he confess before the pack and restore the true records. Silas responded by poisoning the previous alpha, my grandfather, and framing your father for the crime. The room tilted. Alara gripped the arms of her chair, her knuckles white. He killed your grandfather to protect a lie? He killed my grandfather to protect his power, Garrick corrected. And when your father tried to prove his innocence, Silas had him murdered in his cell before he could speak at trial. Made it look like suicide. Then he went after your mother, claiming she was his accomplice, and burned her before anyone could question her too closely. Tears burned in Alara's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She had cried enough over the years, mourning parents she barely remembered, carrying shame for crimes they never committed. Now, sitting in the Alpha's keep with the truth laid bare before her, she felt something harder than grief crystallizing in her chest. "You've known this," she said, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "How long have you known?" Garrick met her gaze without flinching. 3 years. Since my father's death. And you did nothing. I tried to do everything, he said, and for the first time she heard the weight of his own shame. I just did it too slowly. Chapter 5. Dawn broke over the mountain peaks in shades of gold and crimson, painting the training grounds in colors that reminded Alara of the celestial fire that had erupted from her hands. She stood in the center of the circular arena, her borrowed training leathers still too large for her frame, watching as Garrick moved through the space with the fluid grace of a predator marking his territory. "The power you touched wasn't yours alone," he said, circling her slowly. "It belongs to the ancestral stone, to the magic of the first bloodline, to every night bloom who came before you. Right now, it's using you as a conduit. You need to learn to control it, or it will burn you from the inside out." Alara flexed her fingers, feeling the residual tingle of energy that had hummed beneath her skin since the ceremony. The mark on her neck pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat, warm and insistent. "How do you know?" "You're not," she stopped, uncertain how to finish without giving offense. "Not of the old blood?" Garrick's mouth quirked in something almost like a smile. "No, but my father made me study every text we had on the founding families. The night blooms were unique. They didn't just command wolves, they channeled the goddess's own power. It made them dangerous." He stopped in front of her, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. It also made them targets. The morning air carried the scent of pine and frost, but beneath it Alara caught something else, the particular musk of alpha, all steel and stone and barely leashed strength. Her wolf, dormant and suppressed for so many years beneath the weight of her branded shame, stirred with interest for the first time she could remember. "Show me," Garrick said. "Call the power." "Just a spark, nothing like what you did last night." Alara closed her eyes and reached inward, searching for the thread of celestial energy she'd felt coursing through her veins. For a moment there was nothing, just the ordinary thrum of her own heartbeat and the whisper of wind through the pines. Then she felt it, a pulse of blue fire coiled deep in her chest, waiting. She pulled, and lightning crackled across her fingertips in wild, undisciplined arcs. "Good," Garrick said, though his tone suggested it was anything but. "Now control it. Don't let it control you." The lightning surged, jumping from her hand to score the frozen ground at her feet. Alara gasped, trying to rein it back, but the power had a will of its own. It wanted to be free, to blaze, to remake the world in its image. "Alara." Garrick's voice cut through her panic. "Look at me." She opened her eyes and found him standing directly in front of her, close enough that the lightning arcing from her hands could easily reach him. His expression was calm, unafraid, though she could see the tension in his shoulders. "Trial of will," he said quietly. "Your power against my presence. Let's see which one of us is stronger." Before she could protest, he reached out and took her hand. The lightning jumped to him immediately, wrapping around his arm in chains of blue-white fire. Alara tried to pull back, terrified she would hurt him, but his grip was iron. The power surged between them, seeking paths through flesh and bone, and she felt his pain like an echo, old injuries flaring to life wherever the celestial energy touched. "Don't run from it," Garrick gritted out, his jaw clenched. "Master it." Something shifted in Alara's understanding. The power wasn't trying to destroy, it was trying to heal. She could feel it now, the way the lightning sought out Garrick's scars, the places where old wounds had never quite mended. A slash across his ribs from a border skirmish 3 years past. The deep ache in his left shoulder where a rival alpha had nearly torn the joint apart. The countless small damages that came from a lifetime of protecting his pack with his body. She stopped fighting and started guiding. The lightning changed, softening from harsh white to a gentler blue glow. It flowed into Garrick's scars like water finding cracks in stone, and Alara felt the moment his pain began to ease. His eyes widened, shock replacing the stoic determination. "How are you?" "I don't know," Alara breathed, but she did know, somewhere deep in her blood where the memories of her ancestors whispered. The night looms were healers. Before they were warriors. Before everything else. The glow intensified, wrapping around both of them in a cocoon of soft light. Garrick's breathing steadied, his grip on her hand gentling from restraint to something else entirely: connection, recognition, the acknowledgement of power meeting power as equals. When the light finally faded, they stood in the center of the training ground with the morning sun warming their faces, still holding hands, neither quite willing to be the first to let go. Chapter 6. The council chamber reeked of old power and older fear. Elder Silas sat in his high-backed chair like a spider at the center of a web, his pale eyes glittering with malice as he surveyed the assembled elders. 3 days had passed since the ceremony at the stone, 3 days of whispers spreading through the pack like wildfire, and the high priest's carefully constructed empire was beginning to crack. "The girl must be tested," Silas declared, his voice carrying the weight of false righteousness. "What we witnessed at the stone was unprecedented, yes, but unprecedented does not mean legitimate. For all we know, she bargained with dark spirits, made pacts with entities that have no place in the goddess's light." Elder Cassandra nodded eagerly, her jeweled fingers clutching her prayer beads. "The old laws are clear. Any who claim power through unnatural means must face trial by combat. Let the goddess herself judge whether Alara Nightloom is worthy or abomination." Garrick stood at the far end of the table, his massive frame rigid with barely controlled rage. She lifted the ancestral stone. The stone that rejected 17 alpha warriors of your pure bloodlines. "What more proof do you need?" "Proof that she can wield such power without destroying us all," Lord Brennan interjected smoothly. The silver-haired elder had been conspicuously quiet since the ceremony, but now he leaned forward with predatory interest. "Surely you see the danger, Alpha Garrick. If the girl cannot control this magic, if it consumes her or drives her mad, we could all pay the price." Silas's lips curved into something approximating a smile. "A trial by combat serves multiple purposes. It tests her strength, her control, her worthiness to stand among the highborn. And if she fails..." He spread his gnarled hands in a gesture of false sympathy. "Well, then we know the stone's reaction was a fluke, and we can return to the natural order." "And if she succeeds?" Finn asked from his position behind Garrick, his scarred hand resting on his sword hilt. "Then we will welcome her with open arms," Silas said, though his eyes promised otherwise. "As befits one of such extraordinary gifts." The vote was called. 8 members of the council raised their hands in favor of the trial. Only 3 abstained, and none stood with Garrick in open opposition. The alpha's jaw clenched so hard Finn could hear his teeth grinding, but there was nothing to be done. Pack law was clear, and even an alpha could not override a council majority on matters of tradition. 3 days hence, Silas announced. In the arena at moonrise, Alara Nightbloom will face Ronan Irefong, our champion, in single combat. May the goddess grant victory to the righteous. That night, under cover of darkness, Silas made his way to the arena. The old stone structure was empty save for the wind that howled through its open arches, carrying the scent of past bloodshed and ancient victories. The high priest moved with surprising agility for his age, his ceremonial robes discarded in favor of simple black wool that helped him blend with shadow. From beneath his cloak he withdrew a vial of viscous liquid that gleamed sickly green in the starlight. Wolfsbane extract, concentrated and refined, mixed with iron filings ground from blessed silver and the powdered root of a plant that grew only in the wastelands, where magic went to die. He traced the arena's perimeter with meticulous care, pouring the poison into every crack and crevice, letting it seep into the earth where fighters would stand. Not enough to kill outright, that would be too obvious, but enough to suppress magical ability, to sever the connection between a channeler and their power. By the time Alara stepped into the arena, she would be nothing more than an ordinary girl facing a warrior who had killed 12 challengers in formal combat. "You should have stayed invisible," Silas whispered to the empty air, his voice carried away by mountain winds. "Your mother learned too late that some secrets are kept with blood. Now you'll learn the same lesson." He emptied the last of the vial at the arena's center, where tradition dictated the fighters must begin. The liquid hissed as it touched stone, eating into the ancient rock-like acid, leaving stains that looked like nothing more than water damage in the moonlight. When he was finished, Elder Silas stood back and admired his work. The arena looked no different than it had for 300 years, just old stone worn smooth by time and weather. No one would notice the poison until it was far too late. No one would question when the girl's power failed her, when Ronin's blade found its mark, when the natural order reasserted itself as it always did. The high priest pulled his hood up against the cold and disappeared into the night, leaving behind an arena that would serve as Alara Nightbloom's tomb. Chapter 7. The arena blazed with torchlight, transforming the ancient stone circle into a theater of fire and shadow. Every member of the Stoneheart Pack who could walk had come to witness the trial, their voices rising in a cacophony of bets and speculation that echoed off the mountain peaks. Alara stood at the arena's entrance, her borrowed armor hanging loose on her frame, and tried to steady her breathing against the pressure building in her chest. Ronin Irefong waited at the center, a mountain of muscle and scar tissue who had earned his name by biting through an enemy's sword in the heat of battle. His chest was bare despite the cold, displaying the intricate tattoos that marked each of his 12 kills in formal combat. He rolled his massive shoulders and grinned, showing teeth filed to points. "Nothing personal, girl," he called out. "But the council pays well, and you're just another name to add to my skin." Alara stepped onto the arena floor and immediately felt wrong. Her connection to the celestial power, which had hummed constantly beneath her skin for days, suddenly guttered like a candle in wind. The mark on her neck went cold. She stumbled, catching herself on the stone wall, and looked up to find Elder Silas watching from the council's box with barely concealed satisfaction. "Begin." The herald's voice cracked across the arena. Ronin moved with terrifying speed for a man his size. Alara barely dodged the first strike, his clawed hand passing close enough to shred her sleeve. She tried to call the lightning, reached desperately for the power that had lifted the ancestral stone, but found only emptiness where celestial fire should be. The champion's fist caught her in the ribs, lifting her off her feet and sending her crashing into the arena wall. Pain exploded through her chest. She tasted copper and heard the crowd roar, some in excitement, others in dismay. Through blurred vision, she saw Garrick surge to his feet in the Alpha's box, Finn's hand on his shoulder the only thing keeping him from vaulting into the arena. "Is that all?" Ronin laughed, stalking toward her. "The great Nightbloom heir? You can't even shift properly without your magic tricks." He was right. Alara tried to force the transformation, to let her wolf rise and give her the speed and strength she needed, but the poison in the stone beneath her feet smothered everything. She was fighting as an ordinary human against a warrior who could kill alpha wolves with his bare hands. Another strike. Another. Ronin was toying with her now, landing blows that hurt but didn't kill, drawing out her humiliation for the crowd's entertainment. Alara's back hit the center stone, and she slid down it, leaving a smear of blood on ancient rock. "Stay down," Ronin advised, almost kindly. "I'll make the killing blow quick." Through the pain and the fear and the poison clouding her senses, Alara heard her mother's voice, a memory so old she'd thought it lost. You are not just wolf, little star. You are the bridge between earth and sky. When you cannot run with the pack, you must learn to fly. She'd been fighting wrong, trying to match Ronan's strength to beat him at a game wolves had played for centuries. But she wasn't just a wolf. She was a Nightbloom, a daughter of the goddess. And the celestial power didn't come from the ground beneath her feet. It came from the sky above. Alara looked up past the torches and smoke, past the jeering crowd, to where stars blazed in the velvet darkness. She stopped reaching down and started reaching up, calling to the moon that hung full and silver over the mountain peaks, to the ancient magic that lived in starlight and space and the vast cold beauty of the heavens. The mark on her neck blazed back to life. Lightning didn't erupt from her hands. It descended from the sky itself, a pillar of blue-white fire that struck her like a blessing. The poison in the arena stones meant nothing to power that came from the celestial realm. Alara rose, wreathed in lightning that didn't burn, and when she opened her eyes they blazed with the light of distant stars. Ronan's grin faltered. He lunged, putting all his considerable strength behind a blow meant to decapitate. Alara caught his wrist mid-strike and held him effortlessly, the lightning arcing from her hand into his body, not to destroy, but to still. The champion's eyes widened in shock as his muscles locked, as power he couldn't comprehend flooded through him and showed him exactly how small he was compared to the forces that moved the universe. "You are strong, Ronan Irefong," Alara said, her voice carrying harmonics that weren't entirely human. "But strength without wisdom is just violence waiting to happen." She released him, and he dropped to his knees. Chapter 8. The war horns screamed across the valley 3 hours before dawn, their mournful wail shattering the fragile peace that had settled over the Stoneheart territory. Alara bolted upright in her chamber, still bruised from the trial, and knew with terrible certainty that Elder Silas's treachery had consequences beyond poisoned arenas. The Blackridge pack had come for blood. She reached the battlements as the first wave crashed against the outer defenses. Hundreds of enemy wolves poured through the mountain pass like a dark flood, their eyes gleaming with predatory hunger. They had chosen their moment perfectly. The Stoneheart pack was fractured, its leadership questioned, its warriors exhausted from days of political infighting. To the Blackridge Alpha, it must have looked like easy prey. Garrick stood at the center of the wall, his armor hastily donned, barking orders that tried to bring coherence to chaos. The highborn warriors of the pack took their positions with practiced efficiency, their pure bloodlines and expensive training on full display. But Alara could see what Garrick saw. There weren't enough of them. Not nearly enough. "The eastern wall is breached," Finn shouted, his sword already slick with enemy blood. "They're coming through the servant quarters." The servant quarters. Where the lowbloods lived, the disgraced families, the camp laborers who had been deemed unworthy to stand among warriors. The ones the council had spent centuries convincing they were too weak to fight. Alara made her decision in the space between heartbeats. She vaulted over the battlements, landing in the courtyard below with celestial fire already crackling across her skin. The mark on her neck blazed like a beacon as she sprinted toward the eastern breach, her voice carrying across the compound with unnatural clarity. "Lowbloods, laborers, all who have been told you are too weak to defend your home, follow me." They emerged from doorways and alleys like ghosts materializing from shadow. Her brother Kale, barely 16, with a wood axe gripped in white-knuckled hands. Old Mara, the kitchen mistress, her branded shoulder matching Alara's own. Dozens more, then hundreds, those who had spent their lives invisible suddenly stepping into the light with makeshift weapons and desperate courage. "We don't know how to fight," someone called out, fear raw in their voice. "Neither did I 3 days ago," Alara said, and let the lightning dance between her fingers. "But we know how to survive. And survival is the oldest magic there is." The Blackridge wolves poured through the breach, their champion, a scarred brute named Vorgoth, leading the charge with a roar that shook the stones. The highborn warriors were being pushed back, their perfect formations crumbling under the sheer ferocity of the assault. Elder Silas watched from his tower, his face pale, perhaps finally understanding that his political games had opened the door to annihilation. Alara ran toward the ancestral stone. It stood in the center of the main courtyard, unmoved and eternal, its runes dark and silent. She had lifted it once through desperation and inherited power. Now she needed it to do something it had never done before, protect instead of judge. She pressed both hands against its surface and reached deep, not just to the celestial power in the sky above, but to the ancient magic buried in the mountain's bones. The stone had stood here for 3 centuries, watching over the pack, absorbing the blood and sweat and tears of countless generations. It remembered when night blooms had led, when strength meant protecting the weak rather than oppressing them. "Wake up," Alara commanded, and poured everything she had into the ancient rock. The stone exploded with blue light that shot upward like a pillar connecting earth to heaven. The runes blazed to life, rewriting themselves in patterns of power and protection. Alara felt the magic respond, felt it recognize the desperate need of the moment, and then she was no longer directing it, she was channeling it, letting it flow through her and into the very ground beneath their feet. A dome of celestial fire erupted from the stone, expanding outward in a shimmering hemisphere that covered the entire eastern courtyard. The Blackridge wolves slammed into it and recoiled, their first smoking where they touched the barrier. Vorgoth roared in fury and threw himself against the shield with his full weight, but the lightning held firm, pulsing with each beat of Alara's heart. Now, she screamed to the lowbloods gathered behind her. While they're contained, fight. They surged forward with a courage born of finally having something worth protecting. Not the Council's lies or the Highborn's privileges, but each other, their families, their home, their right to exist. Kale fought beside warriors who had mocked him. Mara's axe found enemy flesh with grim efficiency. The branded and disgraced became the shield wall that held when the purebloods faltered. And at the center of it all, wreathed in celestial fire, Alara Nightbloom held the ancestral stone's power steady and showed her pack what true strength looked like. Chapter 9. The Blackridge pack retreated with the dawn, dragging their wounded back through the mountain pass while leaving their dead scattered across the Stoheart territory like broken promises. Vorgotha's body lay at the base of the eastern wall, felled not by highborn warriors, but by a 16-year-old boy with a wood axe and the courage to stand when others ran. The victory belonged to those who had been told they were too weak to matter. Alara stood in the courtyard as the celestial shield finally dissolved, exhaustion dragging at her limbs like chains. The ancestral stone had gone dark again, but she could still feel its presence in her bones, not judging, not testing, but waiting. Watching. Ready to answer when called. "You saved us." Garrick's voice came from behind her, rough with something that might have been awe or might have been fear. The highborn warriors couldn't hold the breach. "If you hadn't rallied the lowbloods, if you hadn't awakened the stone's protection, we would all be dead," Alara finished quietly. She turned to face him, seeing the weight of leadership etched into every line of his scarred face, including Elder Silas and his precious council. The high priest was being held under guard in his tower, along with Lord Brennan and Elder Cassandra. Finn had discovered the poison vials in Silas's chambers, found the falsified records hidden behind loose stones, uncovered 3 decades of systematic corruption that had nearly destroyed the pack from within. The reckoning would come, but first there were wounded to tend and dead to honor. "The pack is calling for blood," Garrick said. "They want the council executed for treason. For the poisoning, the falsified records, the weakening of our defenses." He met her eyes, and Alara saw the question there, the Alpha asking his equal what justice should look like. "Exile," she said after a long moment. "Strip them of rank and possessions, brand them as they branded my family, and send them to the wastelands. Let them learn what it means to survive without the power they hoarded." She touched the mark on her neck, feeling it pulse with steady warmth. "Death is too quick. They should live with the consequences of their choices. Garrick's expression shifted into something that might have been pride. The pack will accept that judgment, especially if it comes from their new Luna. The word hung between them like a promise and a challenge. Luna. Not just a title, but a bond, the recognition that they were meant to lead together, strength and wisdom, earth and sky, alpha and the bridge to the divine. Is this a proposal, Garrick Stohart? Alara asked, allowing herself a small smile despite the exhaustion threatening to pull her under. It's a necessity, he said, but his eyes held warmth that belied the practical words. The pack needs stability. They need to see that the old divisions are ending, that strength comes from unity rather than hierarchy. He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. They need a Luna who can lift the ancestral stone with one hand and protect the weak with the other. And what do you need? His hand came up to cup her face, thumb brushing across her cheek with surprising gentleness for such a warrior. I need someone who will call me a fool when I deserve it. Someone who sees the pack as it should be rather than as it is. Someone brave enough to step into an arena even when they know it's poisoned. His voice dropped lower, intimate. I need you, Alara Nightbloom. The bonding ceremony took place 3 nights later under the light of a new moon that hung like a silver promise in the velvet sky. The entire pack gathered, highborn and low-blood together, warriors and laborers, the branded and the blessed. The divisions that had seemed so absolute were already beginning to blur. The ancestral stone had been moved from the ceremonial plateau to the center of the village square, where Garrick and Alara stood with their hands joined atop its surface. The blue lightning came softly this time, gentle arcs that wrapped around their wrists like ceremonial ribbons, binding them not just to each other, but to the ancient magic that had chosen them both. By the authority of the stone and the blessing of the goddess, the new high priestess declared old Mara, promoted from kitchen mistress to spiritual leader, her branded shoulder now worn with pride, I name you Alpha and Luna of the Stone Heart Pack. May you lead with strength and wisdom, protecting all who seek shelter beneath your rule. The pack held their approval, the sound echoing off the mountain peaks like thunder. Alara looked out at the faces turned toward them, her brother Kale beaming with pride, Finn standing at attention with his hand over his heart, even Ronan Irefong kneeling in respect at the edge of the crowd. The disgraced Omega had become the eternal Luna, and in doing so, had rewritten the laws that governed what strength truly meant. As the celebration began and pack members came forward to offer their loyalty, Garrick leaned close enough to whisper in her ear. Ready to change the world? Alara squeezed his hand, feeling the celestial fire hum contentedly beneath her skin, and smiled. I already have.